Beryl is a middle-aged swordsman who runs a dojo in the middle of nowhere and lives a peaceful life. One day, while he is training, his father turns to him and says he really wishes he had some grandkids to look after. It's been years since Beryl took over as the instructor here, but he's still as maidenless as he was before. Beryl says he's been too busy with the family dojo to think about having kids, but his dad still wants him to at least try. He even suggests that Beryl should try raising up one of his female students so he can get married, but for ethical reasons he refuses. This dojo has been in Beryl's family for generations, and he has been diligently working as the instructor here ever since he took over from his father. Once he dreamed of achieving great things like becoming a famous sword master, but while he is definitely a better swordsman than the average person, he doesn't think his skills are worthy of the sword master title. With that said, he thinks of himself as a good teacher since many of his students have gone on to become successful swordsmen after graduating. Once practice is over for the day, Beryl goes home to have dinner with his parents, but his dad is still insisting that he get married already. Beryl's dad tries to get his friend to pressure Beryl into finding a wife, but she says these things take time, so there's no need to rush him. However, she is still expecting Beryl to give her a grandbaby. Beryl chokes on his food a little because that's a lot easier said than done, especially since he doesn't even have a girlfriend yet. And it's not like a pretty girl is just going to show up at his door. A few seconds later, there's a knock at the door, and Beryl opens it to find a pretty girl standing there. She greets him as her master, and after taking a closer look at her, Beryl realizes that she's one of his former students, Alicia Citrus. Beryl invites her inside and offers her a cup of tea so they can catch up. Beryl remembers Alicia being a gifted student back when he trained her, but he never could have expected that she would become the commander of the Royal Knight Order. Anyway, Beryl asks her why she came to visit, so Alicia explains that part of her duty as Knight Commander is to train new recruits, so she took it upon herself to recommend Beryl as a special sword instructor. She even got approved as an Imperial Order, so she came to inform Beryl of the good news. Beryl never asked to become an Imperial instructor, so he considers declining the offer, but his dad tells him that people can get executed for disobeying an Imperial Order, so he can't just ignore it. Alicia assures Beryl that he won't be killed if he refuses the offer, but he would probably face severe consequences for it, so he had better just go along with it. She already has a carriage waiting to take them to the capital, so they can leave now, and tomorrow, she'll give him the details of his new job. Beryl can't believe Alicia expects him to leave right now, but his dad is already on board with the idea, so he wishes Beryl good luck and tells him to find a wife for himself while he's in the capital. In fact, he says Alicia would make a great wife for Beryl, but Beryl tells him to stop saying stuff like that because it's making Alicia uncomfortable. There's way too much of an age gap for him and Alicia to become a couple, but Alicia mumbles under her breath that she wouldn't mind. Anyway, Beryl doesn't want to find out what the severe consequences are, so he agrees to the offer and accompanies Alicia to the capital. While the two of them are sitting in the carriage, Beryl notices that Alicia is still using the sword he gifted to her. This is a sword Beryl gives to all the students that graduate from his dojo, and Alicia has taken special care of hers ever since she got it. Beryl is glad to see that she values his gift so much, but he doesn't think that sword is good enough for a knight commander like herself to use. He says she could find something better at any other blacksmith, but Alicia says this sword is the perfect one for her. Beryl assumes she must be so attached to that sword because as her former master, she still believes that anything she gets from Beryl is superior, but he is just an ordinary swordsman, so he'd never be able to cut it as a special instructor. Just then, Alicia speaks up and says she is so excited that the hillbilly sword master is finally coming to the capital. Beryl has no idea who she's talking about because he's not a hillbilly, and he's definitely not a sword master, but she tells him that he is well known in the world of swordsmanship. He has trained dozens of students who went on to become legendary swordsmen and adventurers, so he is a bit of a living legend, although Alicia isn't happy with the nickname he got. Beryl finds the story interesting, but he's convinced that Alicia is the only one who thinks of him as a sword master. Soon, they arrive at the royal capital, so Alicia drops Beryl off at an inn so he can rest, and she says she'll come pick him up tomorrow morning. The next day, Alicia takes Beryl to the castle and introduces him to the Knight's Order. She informs all of the recruits that Beryl is so strong that even she would be no match for him, so they should feel honored to have such a skilled man as their teacher. However, a couple of the knights don't think Beryl deserves to be in such a high position, and one of them is particularly unhappy about this. A little while later, Beryl is talking with Alicia in the halls, and she is congratulating him for officially becoming a special instructor. She tells him he only needs to come in to train the recruits 3 or 4 times a month, so it shouldn't interfere too much with his usual lessons at the dojo. Just then, a girl comes running up to Beryl, and she's so excited to see her master again that she can hardly contain herself. Her name is Kiruni, and she was a student at Beryl's dojo 2 years ago. He recalls that her dream was to join the Knight's Order, so he is glad to see that she actually made it happen. Although Kuruni is still only a trainee, so she's still got a lot of work to do before she can become a proper knight. With that said, she is happy that she'll get to train under Beryl again, and the same goes for Alucia. Later that day, Beryl returns to his home, but as he opens the door, he finds that yet another one of his students has come to pay him a visit. His name is Randrid, and he came to introduce Beryl to his wife and newborn child. Beryl is happy to see that Randrid is doing well, but his father cuts him off and says Beryl shouldn't bother coming home until he has a wife and kid like Randrid over here. Speaking of Randrid, after graduating from Beryl's dojo, he went on to become a platinum rank adventurer, but now that he has a child, he wants to retire and move back into the village. Platinum rank is pretty hard to achieve, so Beryl is surprised that Randrid is willing to give it up so easily. But then again, being an adventurer is dangerous work, so he probably doesn't want to risk it while he has a child to take care of. While he's here, Randrid promises to do his best to run the dojo, but Beryl has no idea what he's talking about. Beryl's father tells him that since Randrid is decently skilled, he can take over as the dojo's instructor, and that means Beryl won't have to stay here anymore, so his father is kicking him out, even though Beryl owns this house. The next day, Beryl explains the whole situation to Alucia, and explains that he needs to find a house here in the city. The inn he slept at yesterday was a little too luxurious for him to stay there permanently, so he wants to find a place that's more affordable, and Alucia is more than happy to help him look. She asks him if he'd like to come and live at her house, but Beryl doesn't think that would be appropriate, so much to Alucia's disappointment, he turns her down. Alucia then asks him if he would like to get some food with her since it's lunchtime, and Beryl is fine with that, so they start heading for a restaurant. However, while they are walking, someone calls Alucia shameless for walking around town with a man and calling him master without a second thought. The girl and Alucia seem to have an unpleasant history together, and the girl thinks it is outrageous that a proud knight commander would be running around with a random man. Beryl has been trying to hide his face so he can avoid conflict, but the girl wants to see his face, so she pulls the map down, and as soon as she recognizes Beryl, she calls him master too. Beryl is confused by this because he has no idea who she is, so she reminds him that her name is Serena, and he once saved her and taught her how to use a sword. It takes a while for Beryl to remember, but he eventually recalls finding an injured girl 20 years ago. He took her in, nursed her back to health, and eventually taught her how to fight, but he hadn't seen her in over a decade, so he's pleasantly surprised to see that she's a black rank adventurer. Serena apologizes for not visiting Beryl all these years, but she's also curious as to why he is suddenly in the royal capital. Alucia explains that Beryl has been appointed as a special instructor for the Knight's Order, so he is moving to the capital, and she is here to help him find a suitable inn. However, Serena says she'd be much better at finding accommodations because, as an adventurer, she is used to staying in inns. Serena and Alucia start arguing over who gets to go house hunting with Beryl, and Beryl has no idea why the two hate each other so much, but with their help, he eventually manages to find an inn that suits him. He thanks both of them for their help, but he asks them to please stop arguing with each other for his sake, because he can't listen to any more yelling. Out of respect for Beryl, the two of them stop arguing with one another and quietly walk home. Beryl watches them from a window, and while he can't say he will enjoy all the excitement of city life, he thinks it's nice that he will have so many of his students around to take care of him. The next day, the Knight's Order is training as usual, and the vice commander, Henblitz, is absolutely dominating all the others with his skill. After defeating his sparring partner, Alucia suddenly makes an announcement and informs everyone that there has been a change to the schedule. Instead of once a week, Beryl will be instructing them starting today, so she expects them to work harder than ever before. Beryl tells them all that he's happy to be here, but before he can begin his first lesson, Henblitz approaches and says he has something to say. To be a special instructor for the Knight's Order, Beryl would need to possess a certain level of strength, so he is challenging him to a duel. Henblitz isn't trying to be disrespectful, he simply wants to make sure that Beryl is good enough for the position, and as the vice commander, he is within his rights to ask for a duel, so Alucia sanctions it. Beryl really wishes she would stop agreeing to things on his behalf, but since Henblitz challenged him, he has no choice but to get ready for the duel. Henblitz is sure that Alucia only thinks highly of Beryl because he was her instructor when she was a kid, but that doesn't mean Beryl is cut out to be a special instructor for the Knight Order, so Henblitz is going to prove that by defeating Beryl right now. Beryl agrees with Henblitz because he doesn't think he's good enough for this job, but it would look bad for Alucia if the man she recommended lost easily, so he decides to do his best against Henblitz. The duel commences, and Henblitz charges in to attack Beryl. Beryl begins parrying the attacks, and he is amazed by the sheer power and speed that Henblitz possesses, but he knows that if he can deflect one of the strikes just right, then it will leave Henblitz wide open and he can close in for a strike. That's exactly what he does, and Hemblitz is left speechless because in a real battle, he definitely would have died just now. That counts as a point for Beryl, so the two of them return to their starting positions and Hemblitz begins attacking again. Beryl still can't believe how strong Hemblitz is, but all of his moves are predictable, so it was pretty easy for him to parry. Hemblitz realizes he won't hit Beryl if he doesn't go all out, so he uses his signature move to attack. The Roaring Blade technique has so much power behind it that it can't be blocked or parried, so there should be no way for Beryl to win here. However, after Hemblitz swings his sword, Beryl disappears and reappears behind him with his sword next to Hemblitz's neck. With this, Beryl has officially won the duel, and Hemblitz isn't even mad about it. He is just amazed by the skill Beryl just displayed, and he apologizes for being so rude earlier. Later on, Hemblitz holds a party to welcome Beryl as the new instructor, but he still really wants to know how Beryl managed to counter his signature spin move. Beryl explains that all he did was move along with Hemblitz's rotation, which is how he ended up behind him, but doing it is a lot harder than Beryl makes it sound. In any case, Hemblitz is looking forward to training under Beryl, and so are the others. This was the end of episode 1. Subscribe to not miss the next part.